let's just go ahead and get going. The first thing that we're going to point out is on this interactive agenda, we have some just some kind of targets that we would like to set and just say, we're going to look at constructing a compliant present level today. We're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to look at measurable verbs and what's entailed there. We're going to look at how measurable verbs and proper compliance with present levels and setting of the baseline works with the method of measurement, and how that's going to also make sure that you have a compliant IEP, that one that's quantifiable, one that you can measure, one you can count. When a student does an action through that measurable verb that you've set in that goal, then it's going to be something that you can put numbers to, and you can say the student has made some progress in that area, and that's what we're after. One of the things that we talk about a lot is looking at how that special design instruction comes into play in regards to what you're doing as a special ed teacher. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about LRE. We'll talk about services page, and we'll talk about recoupment and regression if we have time to do all that. That's kind of where we're headed. And one of the things that we want to just first and foremost throw out there to you is that we have certain things that have to be in the present level for compliance. And so I put this in the interactive agenda, type this in, because it's so important. If we don't get this foundation set, this is like building a house. And if you don't get the foundation, all the other areas are going to be weak. And so we really need to set a strong foundation for the IEP as we develop it. When we talk about strengths, we're talking about what can a student do in a particular area of present level. Now, we know that there are several different areas of present level. It starts with communication. If you look at the first page of the IEP, it's going to have all these on there. You're going to have academics. You're going to have health, vision, hearing, and motor. You're going to have social emotional. You're going to have general intelligence. And you're going to go right on down with some areas that are particular to having vision impairment and functional vision and functional hearing. But the main ones that we're going to talk about today are going to be around those areas that we typically see. We only have an hour to talk about this. So we're going to look at, where do we find strengths? Where do we identify the needs? Where do those things come from? And we can say, first and foremost, that we need to make sure that we understand the information that we're placing in the present level. And we need to think of the present level as painting a picture or writing a story about the student. We need it to be real indicative of where the student is actually functioning right now. What level are they currently functioning in reading? What's their functioning in math? How do they function in communication? Is it functional communication needs that they have? Can they get their wants and needs met? Can they carry on a conversation? Can they do that well enough to form relationships? We also need to know and then think about other areas. The IEP, and the purpose of the IEP is very, very straightforward. It's to close gaps in academics, and it's also for functional performance and adaptive performance. And then there's some behavior element to the IEP. So when you're thinking about strengths, needs, baseline, and progress, supporting test scores, and adverse effect, those are the big pieces that go in there. Now, sometimes you're going to have a lot of information in one particular area. You're going to have students going to have strengths maybe from, if you're working on academics, the strengths are going to be drawn from what the student's skill level is and what those skills are up to the point of their current level of functioning. And their current level of functioning is going to be documented by baseline. And so let's just jump in here to the presentation for a second. We can look at the learning intentions for this session. High priority IEP sections. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about present levels. We're talking about goals. We're talking about specially designed instruction. We're talking about LRE. We're talking about services and how we deal with parents. and where parents come in. And Brenda and I were doing a training this morning over in Leslie County, and one of the things that we noticed about the record review document, and if you're not aware of what the record review document is, you need to get your head wrapped into that, because it's really your rubric for your work in compliance. If you're going to apply any kind of standard or give yourself any kind of grade, you should be able to go through that record review document and look at all those individual pieces and start to make sense of those. This is what's required here for IEP, and we've already talked about what's required in present level this morning. And in that training, and what we come away finding was that there's an emphasis placed on parents in there. There's an emphasis placed on parent involvement in the development of the IEP. We should be asking open-ended questions of the parent to make sure that we document what their input is on the development of the IEP, not just a statement that the parent has no input, or the parent's satisfied with the grades, or the parent's this, or the parent's that. It really is a specific question about what goes into that IEP, and you need to capture that by asking open-ended questions and placing that in your conference summary in the parent input section. It needs to be bent toward, it needs to be right toward the development of the IEP. And the other priority for parents is getting them to the meetings. One of the things that you have a caseload, you've identified by this time a mentor, you've had some ARC meetings. There's no doubt you've had some ARC meetings already. And so getting that parent to the table sometimes is difficult, but communication is very available now. Communication is much more available than it was when Brenda and I started all those years ago back in the 80s. And so you can get a parent on the phone, you can do FaceTime. So I want to encourage you to exhaust all the avenues and make sure that you're documenting all the times that you try to reach out to a parent to get them involved in the development of the IEP. And so that's very, very, very key as we move forward. And it is a priority at KDE. It's in all the documentation, parent surveys, yo-yo documents, all types of things that and we may be mentioning things that you haven't been exposed to yet, but there's all kinds of things that they're taking data on that says, how good a job did our district do of including the parents in the child's education when they have an IEP? And that's something we need to really think about. And what are those 4 or 5 things that we need to be looking for in an academic present level? What should be in an academic present level? What should be in a present level? If the box is not checked and the student is not commensurate with the same age peer with expected performance, what should you drop? What should be in there? So what are those things that have to be in present level?
Several people have commented that you need to address, note the strengths, their needs, the baseline, and then the impact statement. You have baseline and progress, supporting test scores, adverse effect.
So that sounds like we're getting some good answers. That's one thing we want out there. So when we're writing that IEP, we're telling that story. Thank you, Chastity. I appreciate that very much. And so,
I do see one that we had mentioned. That's a good one to note. Someone had mentioned comparison to same aged peers.
Absolutely. When you're writing, and that falls under writing that impact statement or writing that adverse effect statement. In order to be eligible in the state of Kentucky, you have to meet the criteria. Then you have to have a large enough gap in a particular area that matches that disability. And you have to be able to say, hey, yes, this student needs more than what's going on in the regular classroom. They need specially designed instruction. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. Okay, so let's move on. We want to also establish purpose, the purpose for the IEP. We want to make sure that you understand, and we talked about that briefly. I mentioned that just a minute ago, but I'm going to throw it up here again. The purposes of the IEP are for academic gap closure. So we have to know where they're functioning. That's why it's so important to set that baseline in the academic piece. It's also important to set that baseline in the functional piece. Now, what are we talking about with function? We're talking about adaptive function. We're talking about how you do with socialization, how you do with communication, how you do with daily living skills. And so, you need to look into those scores and see what the high and low marks are and what's going to impact that student the greatest over the next 365 days, and really determine if they are in need of some functional support. Now, let me talk to you about that just a little bit in terms of disability. When you have a student that is has a mild or has an intellectual disability, in Kentucky we separate those two. We have students that have a mild mental disability have a 70 IQ or lower in general, and then a student that has a functional mental disability has a 55 IQ or lower. And and again, that's in general terms, because there's always a what if or a standard error of measurement to be thrown in that the psychologists like to throw at us sometimes to confuse our world a little bit when it comes to numbers. But what we're talking about there is if you have kids that are in those categories, if you have students that are in low incidence categories and they have severe deficits in adaptive behavior, and you look at that Vineland or you look at that ABOS assessment, and you've got scores in those areas, you can't say that that student is commensurate in that area. So you have to address that, as well as addressing the academic gaps that are there. Also, we have behavioral supports that are needed. We also have the purpose of the IEP also comes with specially designed instruction. Now, that's what the teacher does. That's what the special education teacher does. That's different from what the regular education or general education teacher is going to do. And then you got to document the LRE and the supplementary aids and services provided and allow for parent input. So those are really some big, broad categories for purpose of the IEP. And so we've been talking a little bit about present level. Now, I want you to think with me just a second. Can you think about your own work that you've already done, okay, in writing an IEP? I don't know what level of experience you have at this point, but I do know that you've probably had an ARC meeting and you've been involved in developing or writing an IEP or looking at information. And so when we compare and contrast present levels, what are some of the differences that you would see between those? Let's say we were going to ask you to write an academic present level, and we have to have certain things in there. And then we're also going to ask you to look at the general intelligence section. Can you come up with just a short answer on how those two areas might be different? And let's just let you think about that for a second. So we're talking about general intelligence, and we're comparing and contrasting that to the academic section on the IEP. Is there a way for you to think about that and develop a short answer? So think about the differences. What are some of the things that you could point out that might be different about general intelligence? And when we talk about general intelligence, we're looking at certain particular level of scores and what that impact is. And how does that contrast with just academics? Where do we get information from the academics? Where do we get information from the general intelligence? Can you give us some feedback, Chas? What did some of our responses say?
Some of them, let's see. One person said that the general intelligence information can be found from the evaluation report.
Yes, very good. Psychological report.
The general intelligence shows the IQ, and the academic will show areas that each student will be low in with the test scores. I guess they're talking about the content area, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Right. Good comparisons.
Different testing methods. Information comes from cognitive domains and comparing those to academic achievements.
Okay.
General intelligence is more about IQ, and academics is more about how they are performing now.
General intelligence is more about IQ. It is something that we need to make real distinctions about. And Brenda, I see her. Brenda, I know Brenda's wanting to say. I know she's ready to say something. So Brenda, I'm going to just open the floor up here. And it's better when I hear people talk. And
well, I tried to wait till everybody put all their answers in there, and then I actually put something in myself. And I was the one that said the information comes from those cognitive domains. And then what we do is we compare those domains to your academic achievements. So when you're looking at like maybe working memory or processing speed, those types of things, when you have students with cognitive disabilities, they're going to be low in those areas. So when you look at those, your academics, you know, those are the students that are going to have a hard time memorizing multiplication facts. You know, a lot of times I read in there that the student, you know, cannot read, does not know their multiplication facts in the present levels. Well, then when I go to the cognitive piece and I'm looking at the scores and I'm thinking to myself, no, and they probably never will, because they're so low in that they have issues with short and long-term memory. So they're not going to never learn it. So we have to give those supports to these students. It could be a graphic organizer or whatever. So those students can look and see what the multiplication pieces are. And you can do that with addition, subtraction, anything else. But that's one of the things that as we do our record reviews, I catch. And it tells me in a sense that a lot of the teachers have not been trained on how to take the report and connect that. And I've always preached, and Denny Paul can say this, I've always preached 20, 30 years ago, we're not connecting that cognitive with the academics. So we need to look at their verbal comprehension scores, and we need to look at all those domains. There's 5 of those domains, and you've got to look at each one of those, and you've got a strength, and you have an area of need there, just as much as you do your academic achievement present levels. So you should have a strength listed, you should have a concern listed there. Then you connect that over with the academic achievement. And we made that in our IEP coaching tool, we did have that, the little crosswalk there that helps you all to develop that if they're having issues with a certain area and how it connects to reading and math and those types of skills. So we have that there for you. You can go in there and locate that document, and you can see that.
And Brenda, I will say, not to interrupt you, I know you're on a roll, but that is attached. That is attached to our interactive agenda. If you go into the IEP coaching tool, you can go into the general intelligence section and find that crosswalk that Brenda did for us in that tool. And it's so good at helping you understand those pieces. Go ahead, Brenda. I'm sorry.
And that's fine. That's how I was going to end it, because in there we actually put your STI that's needed, your SAS that is needed, what areas, content areas that it can have issues with. All those things are there for you, and because we understand you have to try to teach school and you don't have time to do all this other stuff. So we try to do certain things for you guys so you won't have to do it. But that's all I've got to say about that.
And Brenda, you set me up perfectly, because I really wanted to talk about working memory a little bit today with our folks. I'm going to charge you to take a look at your psychologicals from your top of your caseload, from your A, the student that last name ends with A or starts with A, and all the way down to Z. I want you to look top to bottom, and I want you to look at working memory and the impact that working memory has on our students, as that is a huge factor in becoming a student with an IEP. And so you really need to understand the definition of what those 5 areas are. You really need to understand how to connect the dots. And it's a really telltale sign when the specially designed instruction does not match with those areas. For example, if you have a student that has cognitive disability and they have a real low working memory, we should have some specially designed instruction in there that is attacking working memory and is teaching students to exercise their brain and make those connections. We should also see in the supplementary aids and services and in the accommodations piece, those scaffolds, if you will, those graphic organizers like Brenda talked about, those mnemonics, and those types of tools that we can provide for our students that may not have the metacognitive process down, that may not know the steps behind and cannot follow the steps that it takes to make a mnemonic device or a graphic organizer. So I think that's spot on, Brenda, and I really appreciate and you jump in anytime you want to talk about it. I want to jump up here and just show you on the screen some of the things that I have in the presentation. And you can see that these are the five, well, actually on this slide, it's the first three areas of the WISC 5. Now the WISC is the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children. This is the test that's most readily given to students that qualify for special education the first time. Okay, most of the time these students between the ages of 6 and 16 are going to receive this evaluation. This is the most widely used and most accepted. It's the most highly sought after norm test that's out there. So verbal reasoning, it's a knowledge of words and being able to apply them. It's verbal and concept formation. It's reasoning and expression. It is, when you look at it, you see that the student's going to have some difficulty with reading, making sense of words, being able to maybe do the, and I'm not a reading specialist, but there's 5 areas of reading, and we have to be in tune with how this area impacts those areas of reading. And then there's a section called visual spatial, and that's being able to see visual detail, understanding spatial relationships, and the construction ability, understanding the relationship between parts and a whole, and integrating visual and motor skills. Now, the crosswalk will tell you what this looks like in layman's terms, in terms of the impact that you'll see on the skills that are being evaluated. And it will also give you some ideas about what special design instruction you should use and supplementary aids and services you should use. Fluid reasoning is another one, seeing the meaningful relationships among visual objects and applying that knowledge using the concept. And then on the next page, working memory and processing speed are the others, demonstrating attention, concentration, holding information in mind, and being able to work with information held in mind. This includes 1 visual and 1 auditory subtest. And then the processing speed is the speed and accuracy of visual scanning and identifying visual objects, short-term memory, and visual motor integration or coordination. And so, you know, with working memory, I would almost bet that if you went into your psychologicals, you're going to find a large number of your students on your caseload are going to have working memory issues. And so it's very important that we build in special design instruction early on in the student's career, where they're practicing remembering information from a blank slate. If you've had my trainings before, you've heard me talk about, Anita Archer talks about it, John O'Connor talks about it, Ann Benninghoff talks about it. All the authors, all the presenters nationally that we kind of hold up in high regard talk about the impact of working memory. If you have working memory issues, you're going to have issues with being able to hold information in your short term. And what happens a lot of times is we permit in a regular classroom, we present too much information too fast. Okay. And that's where the breakdown occurs for the special needs kid. And so we need to be able to say, hey, we've got to chunk this information for this student. We've got to find the critical content, and we've got to allow them some additional practice time. We got to allow them some different ways of processing this information, and maybe it takes them a little longer to do it. But if we're throwing a bunch of different concepts within a 60-minute lesson, they're going to have a really, really hard time with that, and they're not going to be able to process it, nor is their working memory going to be able to hold it long enough for them to make sense or to apply it into other areas. And so it's going to impact mathematics. It's going to impact their ability to do algebra. It's going to impact their ability to see steps, do steps, multi-step problems. You know, they're like Brenda was talking about, their multiplication tables, all those things. And then making sense of those sounds and those symbols to make words and to remember the words that, you know, they struggle over reading the word, and by the time they end up getting to the end of the sentence, they have difficulty with that. A lot of times you'll see a student that's MMD that will have a high verbal comprehension. They can read basic word reading all day long, but there's a breakdown in their ability to hold that in their working memory long enough to make sense of it. So there's lots of things to be gleaned from the psychological report, lots of information that needs to be internalized as a professional in special education so that you can understand that student's learning profile. And that's a big part of how, see, this general intelligence piece, it relates to every other area of present level. That's why I wanted to compare and contrast it with the academics. The academics are obviously the achievement test, the reading, the math, the spelling, the writing, all those things that you would do, listening comprehension, oral expression. And so when you compare their intellect to their achievement, you can see the breakdown. This also is going to have an impact on the students that are OHI on your caseload. If they have processing problems, either they process too fast or they process too slow, or they're not on a task for very long, that's going to have an impact. And you're going to see those. You should be able to check that psychological to see if they're really having that problem, because those things are going to match up. The processing speed and the ADHD go hand in hand. They're either going to have a really high processing speed or a really low processing speed, not an average processing speed if they're ADHD. And so those are all things to consider. Those are things that we wanted to talk about today, and understanding that psychological. And if I were a brand new teacher and I was trying to write a profile of a student, I was trying to learn how they best learn, I've got to wrap my head into that crosswalk. I've got to learn the definitions. I've got to learn what this looks like in the classroom. And I've got to be able to match up special design instruction pieces with this and accommodations with this to help these students overcome these barriers. And that's what we do as special education teachers. So let's move on. We're going to jump out of present level here, and we're going to jump into the components of an annual goal for a second. Okay. So, this is the, information page, if you will. This is the components of the annual goal. And, in our record review document, it still calls for this. It still says that if we're going to make a goal measurable, if we're going to, we can write a goal with all these pieces in it. These are the pieces, the 6 components of the annual goal. Audience, behavior, circumstance, degree, criteria, evaluation, method of measurement, frequency of data collection. And then, as you see, right across in the middle column, you're going to see the definition, kind of what that word means, in layman's terms. What does that word mean? It means audience means the name of the student. Behavior means the measurable verb that you're going to write in there. What we have to be able to measure that action. Okay. And then the circumstances, the conditions under which the verb will be measured. Okay. How are you going to set that action up? Under what conditions are you going to be seeing that verb acted on? Okay. And then the degree criteria is to what percentage and how many times consecutively the student will be able to do that. So if you're giving a student a task with 5 problems and they get 2 of those problems, then you're going to be able to turn that into a percentage. Okay. 2 out of 5. My math person, where are you? 40. Right. That's 40%. So, and then to make that even a little bit more transferable, and to be sure that they can do that with that degree of proficiency, then you're going to do that like on 4 trials, and you're going to see if they can do it 3 out of 4 of those trials, 4 out of 5 trials, whatever that you think is appropriate in regards to what they should be able to do to demonstrate that they can get that percentage consistently. And then one of the things that trips us up, and this is where we kind of fall off the page when we're writing goals. We forget to include the method of measurement. Okay. We forget to include the evaluation method of measurement, the specific tool. Now, if you know, if you've had our trainings before, one of the things that we talk about is Infinite Campus Goal Monitoring tab. In Infinite Campus, there's a tab in there where you go in, you put the data in, it creates a baseline for you, and you're able to input data every so often, and it's supposed to match up with number 6, the frequency of data collection. Down on the bottom, your horizontal line should have dates. that match up with the frequency of how often you're going to take data. If you're going to take data weekly, the gap should be a week between each data point, and you should have that date on the horizontal line. But when we drop off the pages where we see that this is really the telltale sign for us. Are you really doing the probing? Are you really doing the progress monitoring? If you don't have the proper evaluation method of measurement that matches the baseline, matches the verb, if you don't have that method that will actually measure the verb itself, then we're going to be able to tell that there's probably not a whole lot going on with that goal. And so what I'm saying there is you got a drop-down box, and it's going to have direct, indirect, it's going to have authentic, and it's going to have curriculum-based measures. When we see curriculum-based measures, we want to see one word in your goal. We want to see probe. Okay, that's Brenda. Okay, that she's taught me that. That keeps it simple. We're going to probe that student on curriculum-based measures. We're going to get measures on things like fluency, reading fluency, writing fluency, okay, math fluency. Those are curriculum-based measures. Now, when we move into a verb that we're going to measure, where we're going to get a percentage, and we're going to turn that into a percentage, we're going to use things like event recording. We're going to use, what's the other one, Brenda? I saw her saying it.
Duration recording, latency recording.
Yes.
Your interval recording is the same as your event recording.
Right. We're gonna use when we turn it into a percentage, we're going to use frequency count and event recording. And when we measure behavior, we're going to do duration recording, which was what Brenda said. We're going to measure behavior. How long does the behavior last? So really, those are the only three that we want to see: probes under curriculum base, event, and frequency counts under academics. And then for measuring behavior, we want to see those duration recordings, those intervals. But duration is the big one that we want to see. So under Infinite Campus Goal Monitoring, you really have just three types of data that you have to be concerned with. And so that's a big part of it. Let's practice for a second. Let's write a goal with all the components, okay? Or let's check our folder from a recent meeting, if you've got a folder handy, and see if the goal that is in the IEP has all 6 components. But now this is really important. This is a big piece of getting, and having that link back to your baseline, so that method of measurement that you used to set baseline in your probing is the same that you use in your annual goal. And when we look at those two, comparing the two pieces that we've just talked about, we really want to see a skill, a percentage for a baseline, and then we need to go right over to the IEP goals section and find that skill and a higher percentage that we're shooting for.
When presented with 10 2-digit by 1-digit multiplication problems, Sam will be able to determine the correct product with 80% accuracy on 4 out of 5 trials, as demonstrated twice monthly using math probes.
Okay. So Brenda, you want to take a stab at that second one and point out anything that you heard?
The one that we're talking about, when presented with 10 2-digit by 1-digit multiplication problem, Sam will be able to. We need to remove be able to determine, because determine is not measurable. So you're going to be saying Sam will solve, because he's going to solve these problems. So when presented with 10 2-digit by 1-digit multiplication problems, Sam will solve with 80% accuracy on 4 out of 5 trials, as measured by twice monthly math probes. That's how I would say that. So we need a verb in here that is measurable. That's what's, and we don't put to be able to anymore.
As you can see on my screen, I'm not an artiste by any stretch of the imagination, but it's so important that we get a measurable verb. And I think that's what Brenda's alluding to. Mm-hmm. Now, we have some tools that are in our interactive agenda. There's a tool that goes right along with our KVET coaching tool. And there's also a direct link to Bloom's taxonomy of measurable verbs. That's arranged in a display that will ramp up your rigor in your goals, but it also will be a place where you can find verbs that are going to be measurable. You have to be able to see, count, hear, and time those. You have to be able to see, count, hear, and time those verbs in real time, in real action. You got to be able to, in order to measure that and turn that into a quantifiable number. And so just wanted to point that out to you. So very important. And Brenda did such a good job. One of the things I heard was probes on one, and I heard curriculum-based measures on another. I don't want us. I want us to keep us from conflicting those terms. We don't want a repetition of what's in the drop-down box in the body of the goal. We want you to put a specific tool in there, and those specific tools need to match up with what you're having that's going to go into the Infinite Campus Goal Monitoring tab. Chas, do you have others?
I do have one more, and it's a reading one, actually. It says, when given a grade level passage, Kevin will identify textual evidence supporting author's claim with 80% accuracy on 3 out of 4 consecutive attempts as measured by weekly reading probes.
Brenda?
Yes, I guess you saw me shaking my head. When given a grade level passage, does that mean the grade level the child is in? Because if he is reading at grade level, then he doesn't need a goal. You don't need to be in special ed for reading. So if you're going to put that in there, I would say to put in what grade level is the child on? Is he on 2nd grade level in the 5th grade, or, whatever? So when given maybe a 2nd grade level passage, Kevin will identify textual evidence supporting the author's claim with 80% accuracy on 3 out of 4 consecutive attempts as measured by weekly reading probes. That will work. It's just the grade level. We need to know if that child is right on. If he's in the 5th grade and he's on 5th grade level, then he doesn't need a goal. So, we want to make sure that we get that specific grade level in there. So KDE will say, okay, the child is in the 5th grade. He's reading on 2nd grade level. So, but he's not on grade level.
Right. And Brenda, it's so important that we understand the difference between an independent reading level and an instructional reading level, or independent math level, instructional math level. One of the things, and this is industry standard, I don't know where I found this, but I do know this. If you're reading a list of words, let's say the words are benchmark for 2nd grade, okay, and the student can read 90% of those consistently out of 4 out of 5 consecutive trials, they can get 90%. That's their independent reading level, okay? When we move that student up and probe them on the 3rd grade, if they're getting 90% of those, that's going to move their independent level up to 3rd grade, okay? That's not where we're going to write the goal. We have to write ambitious goals. So we're going to move to the 4th grade, okay? Now they only get, out of that word list, of benchmarks, they only get 20%, okay? Now we have found the baseline, okay? So we set that baseline at 20% in the present level. And then we go over and write a goal that the student's going to read on his, given a word list on his instructional level, which is now the 4th grade instructional level. He's going to read, and we're going to say, maybe if he's MMD, we might only say we're going to take him to 60% this time, or 50%. We're not going to get to 80 probably, because his rate of learning is not going to allow that in 365 days. So we would set that. He's going to read those words from that list. His baseline's at 20 on the 4th grade. So on a 4th grade instruction, given words on the 4th grade instructional level, not given words on grade level. If we're writing goals on grade level, like Brenda said, they wouldn't be needing our services. We want you to understand the connection between baseline that you set academically and present level, and following up that with a goal. Now, I would point you to the IEP guidance document for further reading on this. I would point you to our IEP coaching tool. And of course, we always provide training. Chastity and Stephanie do wonderful trainings around looking at the standards, pulling out the skills that need to be covered, the skills that need to be attained to move through the grades, be able to respond to the standards. And we're supposed to kind of use that as a guide for our IEP. Okay. So when we pull those skills out, we probe those skills and we set a baseline. And then when we get that baseline set, if it's 20% on the 4th grade instructional level, then when we go over and look at our goal, that goal is going to be written to about 67, depends on rate of learning, depends on the student's ability level as to how quickly they can reach that next level. Okay, so we really need to be careful about not writing goals on grade level or saying grade level when we're writing goals. Chas, do you have something to say?
I do. Not that I wasn't trying to hop in there. I was getting taken
No, it's fine.
But I just like to, when we talk about this, I'd like to say, because I think one common misconception that we have as teachers, and I see this region-wide, is as teachers, we are told that our IEP goals have to align to the standards. So, which they do, but I think it's a misunderstanding of what that means exactly. So when teachers hear they have to align to the standards, you're thinking, okay, if my child is in 4th grade, it has to be that 4th grade standard. But and then that goes into what we mentioned, that training that we talk about. That's why you look at those progressions of your standards. And I think in math, it's called something different, and I cannot pull it, but in reading and writing, it's called progressions. So that's what that's used for. If your child is physically in the 4th grade, but they are functioning, they're independent, their instructional level is at the 1st grade, you go back to that 1st grade standard and work on that skill. That is aligning to that 4th grade. You're aligning it to the standards, but you have to address that skill at the 1st grade level before they can even think about meeting those levels at the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade. So that's what that means. And I think that's the misconception why people get confused on that.
And Chas, we were in a training just the other day together in Frankfurt, and they were talking about that very thing. If one of those skills is deficient in reading, one of those in those 5 areas of reading, it's going to lead to a failure in reading comprehension.
Mm-hmm. And it goes back to not just phonics, but the phonemic awareness, which is pre-K.
Right. And phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, your fluency, and all that's going to add up. And then also providing students with those rich language environments where you're supporting vocabulary development, and you're looking at all that and how that all works together. But you're certainly right. It's not going to be perfectly aligned. And sometimes you can provide an accommodation that's going to allow some access to that 4th grade curriculum. And you certainly should be doing those accommodations as those things are permitted based on the disability. But we don't want to throw out teaching the student how to read too soon, because that is so important in terms of a life skill. And Brenda and I were talking about that this morning in our training session. And that leads me to the last piece here. Always remember to make your goal. If you can write it with 6 components, but if it's not measurable, it's not going to be worth the paper it's written on, because you can't progress monitor something that you can't turn into a number. So keep that in mind. And then this last piece, I've been on this kick for a while, and my colleagues have heard me talk about Ann Benninghoff so much. They know that it's my new favorite person in terms of academic pursuit in this realm. Special design instruction is adapting the content, methodology, and delivery of instruction. But it's really what you do out there. You should be asking yourself every day, what did I do special for my students? And how did it relate to the goal? And am I providing them with a skill, or is it building the skills that they're going to be able to take with them down the hall? Let me give you an example as we get ready to close out here. When you're thinking about accommodations and you're thinking about special design instruction and the difference between the two, one of the best examples I can give you is around mnemonics. And now, a mnemonic is where you take the first letter of a word that you want to remember and you create a nonsense word, or you create a word that's memorable to you so that you can remember the information. And I'll give you the one that I use a lot. It's VARK, V-A-R-K. Okay. It's visual, auditory, reading and writing, and kinesthetic. And that's the modes of learning. When you're writing that student's profile, you should be identifying how they learn. Do they learn best visually? Do they learn best by auditory means? And when you give them that mnemonic device as a way of remembering those things that you're trying to get them to remember, when you give them, that's a tool. That's an accommodation. Okay. Same way with the graphic organizer. If you hand them the graphic organizer, that's a tool. Okay. Fill this graphic organizer out in this class. Let this use this as a tool for you to organize your information that you need to remember. But if you teach a student how to build their own mnemonic device, the metacognitive process behind the device, if you teach them how to make their own graphic organizers, it becomes real to them and it becomes transferable and it becomes a skill that you can walk down the hall with and you can use in another class. And that's what we're after with specially designed instruction. Teaching them to actually make a mnemonic device is special design instruction. Handing them a recorded one or a pre-produced one is accommodation, and it's a tool. Thank you so much, and reach out to us if you have questions, and we'll do our very best to get out to see you. Thank you all.